My sister held her wine like a gavel and asked, "Did the thrift store throw that in for free, or did you dig in the reject bin?" The laugh that followed wasn't loud enough to draw the room, but it was sharpened for me alone, a private little blade dressed in cabernet, and I felt it slip beneath my ribs even as I smoothed the skirt, fingers finding the faintest tug in the hem, as though the fabric itself had taken offense and curled away from her. I told myself to breathe, to keep my fork hovering midair, as if I were still deciding whether the scallops were worth their market price, to pretend that linen tablecloths and hush servers and long-stemmed glassware had ever been ordinary for me, and that being here wasn't a dare she set just to watch me wobble. I had promised myself I would be gracious tonight, that I would be the grown-up at our two-top ceasefire before my red eye, that the layoff would not leak out of me in little apologies, that I would not let Sabrina touch the part of me that still tried to impress her. She leaned back, the diamond studs winking under the chandelier, the corners of her mouth hitching into a smile that had always meant she was about to be generous with cruelty. She told me she could recommend a stylist who understood proportion, which in Sabrina speak meant someone who could disguise the soft truth of late-night cereal and too many double shifts. I felt the shame flush climb my throat, hot and determined, and I pressed my palm over the seam at my hip, feeling that odd lightness in the hem again, the tiniest metallic tap when my knee bumped the table leg, like the dress had swallowed a secret and wanted out. She tossed her hair and asked about my flight, and whether the airline still cattle calls economy, or if they'd upgraded a Stampede, and I kept my voice level as I told her yes, I would board with everyone else, on time, like a person who knows there are rules and knows how to follow them. She tissed about Mom's storage unit as if it were a distasteful hobby I'd insisted on, not a task she had refused, and she asked whether I'd remembered to bring the right keys, and when I said yes, she reached across the table to squeeze my wrist in a perfect simulacrum of concern, suggesting I drop my bags at her condo on the way to the airport because those neighborhoods near cargo can be unpredictable. The fork paused in my hand, a tiny tremor clinking it back to the plate, and I pictured the unit's metal door, the dust-creased boxes, the last pieces of a life that smelled like cedar and clean paper, and I wondered how grief could feel so heavy and yet weigh nothing you could put on a scale. I told her I'd manage, because I always do, and that was when I noticed the back of the thrift store receipt folded in my clutch, still warm from my palm. A scratchy ballpoint line I hadn't seen earlier, almost tentative, like a note passed in study hall. Ask at gate 22. The words perched in my chest like a sparrow ready to bolt, and everything in me wanted to pretend I hadn't read them, because I knew how easily I could spiral, how the smallest anomaly could open a trapdoor under my feet and turn the night into a scavenger hunt of meanings. But then I thought of Mom's habit of disguising instructions as afterthoughts, of how she had trusted me with the executor paperwork when Sabrina called the role clausos, clerical, and I let the bird flutter where it wanted to. I pressed the receipt flat under my water glass, feeling that metallic tap in my hem again, and I realized the ruin of being the quiet sister is that you collect everyone's fragments without asking, and yet the grace of it is that you learn to listen for the faintest hinge in a room. I breathed, squared my shoulders under the soft cotton of the dress, and eased my expression into something I've seen nurses wear at 3 a.m. Earned poise, the kind you hold when the alarms are loud and the patient's wife is panicking, and you decide to be the calm that builds a bridge. Sabrina kept talking about the board she'd joined, about the gala theme, about how some people confuse humility with poor taste, and I nodded when nodding was appropriate, and I let her misread my silence as submission because it was easier to keep the surface smooth while I catalogued every detail that didn't match. The hem, the note, the way the dress had felt almost weightless on the hanger and yet carried itself with a kind of posture, as if it remembered a better room than this. I looked around at the other tables and thought about how American restaurants reward performance, the right laugh, the right cadence, the right kind of watch, and I understood that I would not audition tonight. I would not chase her regard. I would not feed her the ending she expected, with me making small, eager bargains just to keep the peace. She raised her glass for a toast to fresh starts and good choices, and I met her eyes, and I lifted my water instead of wine because I still had to drive, and I said evenly that sometimes good choices look like thrift to people who can't tell the difference between cost and value. She blinked, not because I'd been clever, but because I'd been clear, and clarity has always been the one language she cannot turn into a joke. My hand returned to the skirt, smoothing it once more, not as apology but as ritual, and I felt for the hummingbird faint tap inside the hem, and thought, if there is a secret here, it is mine first. When the host drifted toward our table, cradling a cordless phone against his vest like a relic, I felt the air change before he spoke, a small tilt as the room aligned to a new center, and I knew with the certainty you get when your name is called from a doorway in a busy ER that whatever came next would not be harmless, and that I had already decided not to be either. I set down my napkin with care, let my shoulders square in the sasyadzom chair, shaped my mouth into a calm smile that belonged to me and not to her, and turned to face the interruption. Miss Nora Hale, the airport just called for you. Airports don't call strangers mid-dinner, unless you're on a list you never signed up for. The host offered the phone the way people offer bad news, with 2 hands and a careful face, and I could feel Sabrina's attention fastened to me like a brooch she meant to reposition. The line clicked, a woman's voice identified herself as the gate agent for my flight, and, in the same calm tone you'd use to verify a seat assignment, asked that I arrive early for pre-boarding to complete documentation. No explanation, no apology. I heard myself thank her with the kind of politeness that feels like surrender, then set the phone down beside my plate and paused with my fork above the scallops, as if I could hold the moment there until it behaved. Sabrina's smile widened. She asked if my thrift dress had triggered TSA, and the table might as well have tilted because beneath the sting her words always carried, something else slid into place. Interest, sharp as a pin. I told the host I'd be right there and reached for my clutch, smoothing the dress without thinking, palm finding the whisper of that odd seam, as if the fabric could be soothed into telling the truth. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Your pre-boarding is confirmed. Do not be late. It felt like being named at a graduation where you hadn't enrolled, and the shame flush rose, hot and foolish, because I hate being watched, and Sabrina loves nothing more than to stage manage a crowd. I squared my shoulders and arranged my mouth into a calm smile that did not ask her permission to exist, then excused myself for the restroom with the same voice I used to walk a patient son through a hard update at 3 a.m. Steady, clean, no extra words to snag. In the mirror's bright honesty, I lifted the hem and found the hand-stitched seam again, almost invisible, slightly uneven, the kind of work done in a hurry by someone who knew exactly what she was hiding. My fingers traced a flat edge. Something laminated lay flush against the lining like a blade in a sheath. I teased it out, breath shallow, and there it was, a small card with my name printed in block letters, Concierge Pre-Board and say, Hale, its surface etched with a number under the laminate, 1122, gate note. The digits looking less like time than like a directive. I didn't know whether to laugh or sit down on the tile. The card felt like a dare, wrapped as a favor, and I thought of Mom with her gentle riddles and her habit of hiding certainty inside courtesies, and I missed her so sharply it made sound. I studied the thrift receipt again, the charity stamp I'd ignored earlier, Widow's Chest Charity, Estate Lot, CR 22, and the coincidence felt too insistent to be called that. The letter CR tugged at Camden Row, the storage facility where Mom's boxes waited for me alone because Sabrina had declined the manual labor of grief, and I understood that what I'd been calling a costume might be a carrier. The spiral of self-doubt tried to open beneath me. What if this was all nothing? What if I was reading kindness into static because I wanted my mother to still be speaking? But I pressed my palm to the seam and let my spine find its familiar line. Inner steel doesn't announce itself. It simply refuses to move. Sabrina banged on the door with theatrical restraint, asking through clenched sweetness if I was all set for the spectacle, offering to drive me to the gate so we can witness your VIP moment together. I kept my voice mild and told her I'd settle the check. Then I called the thrift store, let the after-hours message run, and wrote down the part about estate releases processed from Camden Row. It was a small sentence, but small sentences are how you thread a labyrinth. I made one more call to hear the message again, then slipped the laminated card back into the hem where it had lived, and for the first time since the layoff I felt not luckless, not left over but chosen, not by Sabrina, not by a restaurant, not even by a flight manifest, but by a woman who had always trusted me to keep going when the scenery turned unkind. I returned to the table where the dessert menus were performing as fans in Sabrina's hands and told her I needed to head out sooner than planned. She feigned disappointment big enough for an audience, then flagged the server with a fingertip that said she never had to repeat herself. I thanked the host for the call and the way he had protected my privacy with his body in the space between tables. And I tipped more than I could defend on a budget because dignity is also a bill, and sometimes you pay it gladly. Sabrina asked 3 times in 3 different registers whether I was nervous about why the airline wanted me first. I refused the script where I confessed smallness. I said I was curious, which was true, and that I preferred to get information from the source, which was also true. Outside, the night carried that airport district smell of jet fuel braided with ocean, and the wind lifted my skirt in a way that felt almost conspiratorial, as if the dress were pleased to be in motion. I steadied it with one hand, smoothing again, and let the other rest on the cool curve of the trunk while I clicked the fob and listened for the latch. Sabrina leaned in with a hug too tight and too long, the kind designed to look affectionate from a distance and to bruise up close. I stepped back with gracious restraint because there was no point in performing a tug-of-war over the narrative when I could simply walk to it, and I told myself, like a promise with the sound turned down, that I would not let her see me hurry. As we step into the lot's sodium light, Sabrina lifts my trunk, distracts me with a joke about gate lice, and with fingers practiced from a lifetime of taking first, slides the laminated pre-board card out of the dress lining and into her pocket, confident I didn't see. A gate area is a stage where no one expects a plot twist, until a single name is spoken to a silent crowd. By the time we reached the terminal, the choreography of American travel had already wrapped itself around us. The belt-off dance at TSA, the plastic tubs that always seem too small for real life, the soft-voiced apologies from agents who have learned to deliver bad news with the cadence of a lullaby. I moved through it with the practiced politeness you learn when you've been on the receiving end of other people's impatience, smoothing my dress where the wind had wrinkled it in the lot, and keeping my breath even each time Sabrina made a point of glancing at the first lane, as if a look could upgrade her. The concourse opened in a wash of white light and rolling wheels and overlapping announcements about standby lists and overhead bin space, and I felt the old shame flush threaten to creep back, remembering her quip about my stampede boarding. But I pressed a palm to my skirt and made myself remember the line I drew at the table. I would not audition for belonging. I would walk to it. Gate 22 sat at the end of a bright corridor, the carpet patterned like ocean chop, the kind of liminal space where strangers click into the same story for an hour and never meet again. The agent at the podium wore a tidy bun and a name badge that caught the fluorescence, Marie. And as I offered my passport, she did what all good frontline people do, assessed in a single look whether I needed soothing, cajoling, or straightforward facts. The scanner chirped, her eyes flicked to something on her screen, widened by a degree only someone watching for it would notice, and she leaned closer in that professional bubble of discretion that says the news is unusual but manageable. She asked me to wait a moment, then in a voice pitched to carry no farther than my shoulder told me there was a flag on my file from customer relations, a note that I should be escorted to pre-board for package retrieval, which would be handled by her. The phrase rang in my chest like a utensil tapping crystal. Package retrieval could mean luggage rescreened, an apology amenity, or a breadcrumb my mother had smuggled into a place where rules are, scripture and rituals repeat. Before I could ask a question that would make me sound naive, Sabrina materialized at my elbow with the laminated card she had lifted from my dress, holding it between 2 fingers like a favor she was too gracious not to return. "You left this, sweetheart," she said, the pet name sticky with triumph, and I understood the exact performance she wanted. Me flustered, me grateful, me indebted to her for a thing she had taken. I kept my face composed, thanked her without adding any decoration, and slid the card into my clutch as if it had never strayed. Marie watched the exchange with the kind of neutral curiosity only airline staff can perfect, then lowered her voice further, lips moving as she read something I couldn't see. She said my name triggered a delivery protocol, and that when pre-boarding was announced, I should approach alone. The word alone landed like a hand on my back, not pushing, not restraining, just reminding me I had a spine. Sabrina declared to no one in particular that she would grab a seat, to film Nora's VIP moment for the family chat, and she picked the row that faced the podium, angling herself so the camera would find her first. I took the far chair by the window, laid the laminated card flat beneath my palm, and let the spiral of self-doubt try its old tricks. What if this was a glitch? What if I built a cathedral on the scaffolding of coincidence? What if Mom's riddles were just the wishful architecture of grief? And then I thought of the thrift receipt, of Camden Row's initials tucked in the charity stamp, of the voice on the lounge recording that knew my name, and I let the doubt pass through like weather. I squared my shoulders, looked straight ahead, and felt for the sewing along the hem where the card had been nested. The stitch caught my fingertip, a tiny bite that told me it had been rushed, and when I traced farther, I found a second contour, flat and cooler than fabric, so perfectly aligned with the seam that I would have missed it if I hadn't been searching like a person who understands that love leaves instructions. I stood, told Marie I would be right back, and took the long way around to the restroom so Sabrina wouldn't catch the pivot on her screen. In the bright mirror's truth, I slipped my hand inside the lining and eased out a thin metallic rectangle capped with a tab of blue tape, a micro USB with a handwritten label in block letters that looked like my mother's careful print. Open when they call you first. The words made my throat tight in the good way, the way that means someone honored what you struggle to name. I snapped a photo and texted it to my own number, the low-tech redundancy that has saved more than one night shift, and for a moment I heard Mom in the place memory hides her. Time is a hinge, not a cage, reminding me that the only way out of a door like this is through. When I returned to the seating area, I let Sabrina see me calm, not as a taunt, but as a boundary. She panned her phone toward me to capture a reaction shot. I offered a small, composed smile that refused to confirm whatever story she had already written. And then I faced the podium and waited in the way you do when you have chosen to be seen on your own terms. The gate monitors refreshed. The jetway agent ducked out and back. The crowd performed its small rituals of impatience with sighs and zippers. I thought of the fork pausing over scallops hours and a lifetime ago, of how I had held it in the air to keep from giving away the tremor in my hands, and I realized the tremor was gone. Whatever waited at the end of this protocol, it could meet me standing up. The speakers crackled, the room drew breath, and Marie's voice, trained to soothe, now ringing with ceremony, said, "Pre-boarding now for our special guest, Nora Hale." As the gate fell quiet and dozens of faces turned toward me while the agent lifted her eyes to only mine. Pre-boarding is usually a category. Tonight it's a person. Me. The murmur comes first, that soft ripple of confusion that moves through a gate like wind through reeds. Passengers lifting their heads from screens, couples trading quick glances, a father pausing mid-snack bag negotiation, and somewhere behind them Sabrina sitting up straighter with that feral brightness she gets when the spotlight surprises her and she thinks she can redirect it. I smooth the dress because my hands need a task, square my shoulders the way muscle memory teaches after 1,000 hard nights, and meet the podium with the calm smile I have earned, not borrowed. Marie steps out from behind the computer in a motion so measured it reads ceremonial, and when she closes the remaining steps between us, she is already holding a sealed envelope and a small brass key threaded through a blue ribbon faded at the edges, and she places them in my palm with the gravity of someone returning an heirloom rather than distributing an amenity. Her voice drops into that curated privacy airlines keep for both dignity and liability, and she tells me they were instructed months ago that if I appeared under this booking, pre-boarding would begin with a single name and an identification step confirmed by voice note. As she taps the foam pad of her headset with 2 fingers, the way a surgeon touches a sterile instrument, I hear a clipped audio file play through her earpiece. My mother's cadence, or something like it, a shape of sound that makes the room tilt even though my feet are steady. I slit the envelope with my thumbnail because waiting has become a posture I refuse to hold longer than necessary, and inside is a boarding pass reissued with my name translated up the cabin map into first and a single handwritten line on hotel stationery, the kind you tuck in a purse after a conference because it feels too heavy to throw away. When they speak only your name, open the drive. The instruction does not surprise me so much as square me up to the moment I have been walking toward, since the host put the cordless phone into my hand. Because if grief has taught me anything, it is that love leaves maps, and those maps prefer verbs to nouns. The blue ribbon sighs across my knuckles as I turn the key, and the tag on the ring flashes a stamped number, Siege 22, which lands in my chest with a click that is both relief and foreboding. Camden Row's initials and the estate lot that rode the thrift store receipt like a watermark, an echo too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Memory, uninvited and insistent, threads through the fluorescent present. My mother in her final months asking me to sign certain papers with her maiden name restored because she liked its music and because, as she said with that quiet, bone-deep logic of hers, names should tell the truth. Sabrina had rolled her eyes at the time and called it romantic, then refused to use the name on anything that might place me at the center of a line. A kindly older man in a blazer appears at Marie's shoulder as if conjured by the script, his tie knotted with the kind of care older men reserve for ritual, and he introduces himself as Ron from customer care, offering, in tones both solicitous and authoritative, to walk me down the jet bridge for privacy when we board so that any package retrieval can occur without extra attention. His phrasing is polished to remove friction, yet the words still scrape because they confirm there is more choreography ahead, and because I understand exactly what it means that commercial infrastructure now holds my mother's last instructions like a bank holds a safe deposit key. Sabrina arrives at the counter with the laminated card she stole and a smile painted to suggest generosity, asking for the same treatment with the throwaway entitlement of people who are used to service bending toward them. And Marie, without even lifting her chin, declines with a single sentence. Only Nora Hale is authorized. That might as well be a door sliding shut on a world where Sabrina expects to be announced first. The sting that used to follow such moments catches, then dissolves, and in the space it vacates, I feel the clean weight of my own name. I slide the micro USB back into the seam of my dress and the brass key into the small zip pocket of my clutch, the metal a patient promise against my palm, and I lower my voice to ask Marie the question that has been building since the lounge. Who set this and how did it find me here? She glances at the line growing behind us and answers with the clipped courtesy of someone who has said a thing enough times to respect its edges, that the only information they are given is a set of initials, Ace H, and a timing protocol that opened when this particular flight opened for check-in. AHL could be my mother, Alice Hale, although she never once worked with airlines, never did anything more in a terminal than buy a magazine and make sure we had gum for landing. So if this is her, she learned to orchestrate in a realm she never practiced, or she found someone who did. Behind me, the gate area resumes its rituals, anxious stretching, aisle seat boasts, a teenager counting backup chargers, yet the air has shifted because the stakes have. What looked like coincidence now reads like engineering, and I can see my mother's careful hand converting customer service levers into safes, embedding trust inside standard operating procedure, hiding care in the one place Sabrina would never think to look because she has always. Belief power is only what you can see. I smooth the dress because detail centers me. Let my shoulders find their squared line again. Stand in the now predictable curiosity of strangers without shrinking. And remind myself that gracious restraint is not capitulation but control. That I can measure each step without giving away the floor plan. Ron leans in with the kind of courtesy that belongs to older systems built on handshakes and paper files, his voice lowering until the words feel like a note slid under a locked door, and he says what tips the room inside me into a new shape. Not cruelly, not even dramatically, simply as a fact delivered with care and finality. Ms. Hale, the person who set this in motion died in February, but their instructions unlock tonight. If a thrift dress carries a map, the body wearing it becomes the destination. Ron's sentence kept echoing as Marie waved me past the podium, and I walked with him through the split in the crowd toward the cordoned entrance of the first lounge, smoothing my dress the way you settle a thought before it turns into an argument. The door hushed behind us and the world changed temperature. Sanctuary lighting, a civilized clink of glass, a murmur calibrated to calm. I felt the fork pause again in my wrist, the ghost of that dinner table teeter, and then I squared my shoulders and asked for a quiet corner, as if I did this every week, as if being singled out were something I had earned on purpose and not something grief had engineered in my mother's handwriting. I opened my laptop, slid the micro USB from its stitched nest in the hem, and inserted it with the kind of slow care you give a key you're afraid to break. A prompt blinked up with bureaucratic cheerfulness. 3 tries, erase on failure, the digital equivalent of a trapdoor under a rug. I breathed the way we coach anxious relatives to breathe, count in, count out, and scanned the hotel stationery note again. When they speak only your name, open the drive. The gate moment had been the key in the lock. Now the lock demanded a word. I typed CR22 because it felt obvious and tidy, and the system spat it back like a bad diagnosis. I tried gate 22 because I'm human and hope is repetitive, and the warning bar pulsed red, one attempt remaining, the heart rate spike audible in my own ears. I sat back, smoothed the dress in a long stroke that found the label at the inner waist, Alden and Hart, letters stitched in a thread so fine it read like a secret. A.H. The same initials Marie had given me when I asked who set this in motion. Touch memory took me somewhere dusty and kind. Mom in the attic, easing the lid off an Alden and Hart shoebox that smelled faintly of cedar and talc, letting me try on an old silk scarf and laughing when I tied it like a headband. Sabrina sold that box during the estate purge with a shrug about minimalism, and I had let the moment pass because I was tired and because every fight felt like a raffle, where the prize was more fighting. I looked at the cursor waiting for me and let the past finish its sentence. I typed Alden Hart, no ampersand, and the drive inhaled, the warning vanished, and folders bloomed onto the screen like rooms lit in sequence. Camden Row, receipts, signatures, voice. My hand shook as I clicked voice because sound is the closest thing to resurrection we get. And a single file opened with a small pop, and my mother's voice came through with the clean steadiness of a woman who had recorded this several times until she got the tone she wanted. If you're hearing this at a gate, you chose to keep moving. Good. The words reached farther than the speakers. They found the place in me that had been working to stay upright all evening, the place that had refused to audition. She explained in the same voice she used to order pharmacists around with a smile that after her diagnosis she rerouted what she could into a trust with guardrails, that Sabrina had tried to contest pieces of it immediately, and that because I was the one who read fine print instead of commenting on it, she built a protocol that would walk only to me. I clicked Camden Row and found a single PDF marked with the same date as the will addendum. The first page was a simple instruction sheet. Upon presentation of the brass key marked CR22, manager to release one ledger and verify recipient's identification by voice note. The voice note embedded below it was only my mother saying, "Nora will know what to ask." I opened receipts next. Scans of wire transfers and cashier's checks, moving in tidy columns from accounts with my name on the memo line to shelves with names styled to be forgettable. Signatures showed Sabrina's cursive ghosting over forms where I should have appeared. The loops and flourishes I knew from birthday cards turned mean by context. I didn't let myself cry because that would have wasted a minute I needed for comprehension. Instead, I let the shame flush roll through and out, and in its wake I felt the inner steel set, the quiet plate of resolve clicking into place the way a seatbelt settles on the first try. Mom's message returned in a text file at the root, so short it read like a benediction. The item they must deliver is the key to Unit 22. In that unit is a ledger of Sabrina's withdrawals in your name. Don't confront, document, use daylight. If the airline calls only you, you're ready. The laughter at dinner, loud in my bones a half hour ago, reframed itself without my permission. Sabrina hadn't been improvising. She'd been obstructing, stretching the meal, pressing me to detour by her condo, angling to slow the hour when my name would be the only one spoken. The cruelty was incidental. The strategy was the point. I understood then that the dress she mocked had been more than a prop in our sister play. It had been the messenger she failed to read. I closed the folders, backed the files to my email, returned the key, drive to its place in the seam, and zipped the clutch. My hands were steady now. The fork had been set down, the spiral acknowledged and declined, the authority call accepted without flinching. I stood, shoulders squared, and thanked the attendant who had guarded my corner with a pitcher of lemon water as if it were a taller wall. When I turned toward the frosted doors, the quiet in me felt like a decision rather than an absence. The lounge PA chimed with that pared-down airline politeness that makes even urgency sound optional. Final boarding for Flight 182. Will Nora Hale proceed to the jet bridge immediately? Escorted. Bullies don't just laugh, they reroute. The lounge doors sighed open, and the concourse brightness rushed back in. all chrome and hurried voices and the steady undertow of rolling wheels. I felt the old fork paws twitch in my wrist and smoothed the dress as if pressing the fabric could press time into behaving, then squared my shoulders and moved toward the jet bridge where Marie stood like a small, immovable law beside the scanner. That was where Sabrina stepped into my lane, smile lacquered to look like grace, palms up the way a magician invites you to believe. "I'll walk you down," she cooed, angling her body to make the space look scarce while her eyes flicked to the podium, calculating. Marie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Only Nora," she said, and the calm finality of it rang louder than any announcement. People turned the way they always do when boundaries are drawn in public. Sabrina hates witnesses when she can't choreograph them. She shifted tactics instantly, the way bullies with practice do. A screenshot bloomed on her phone, shoved close enough for me to catch the pixel grit, an email from Alden and Hart Client Services flagging a fraudulent beneficiary, me, draped in the kind of fake legalese that Hope's tone will pass for truth. I let my gaze skim it once, not giving her the pleasure of a second pass, and there it was, the tell so basic it felt insulting. The domain was misspelled, a swap letter a child would notice. The footer address didn't match the boutique's archive city that Eliza had mentioned in my mother's notes. The timestamp landed in the hour we'd been eating scallops. Sabrina watched my face like a trader watching a chart. I gave her nothing but air and a politely lifted brow. She leaned in until the perfume turned sharp, hissed that Mom hadn't made me executor because I was trustworthy. She had done it out of pity, so I'd have something to keep me busy while grown-ups handled real money. The sting of it was familiar enough to feel almost nostalgic, like touching a scar and remembering the first cut. The shame flush tried to do its climb, but I kept my breathing slow, the way we tell panicked relatives to breathe at 3 a.m, and let the spiral of self-doubt roll past like weather that doesn't belong to me anymore. I glanced down the concourse and clocked a young ramp agent pausing to watch us before he looked away with professional discretion. Airports are built on ritual and spectatorship. If I needed leverage, all I had to do was keep my voice even and my posture precise and let the public setting do its quiet work. Ron materialized at my elbow exactly when he should have. Blazer crisp, voice steady on the frequency of reassurance. "Once you board, the handoff is automatic," he said, a sentence engineered to lower everyone's pulse. Sabrina heard the word handoff and panic slipped under her mask so quickly I almost missed it. Then her fingers were on my wrist, nails pressing crescents through the thin sleeve, sliding down to the dress seam with a pickpocket's confidence, hunting the hidden weight she assumed was still there. It struck me, not for the first time, that she didn't underestimate me because she thought I was stupid. She underestimated me because she needed me to be. I let her feel fabric and air and nothing else, because the drive was already back in its stitched nest and my entire body had become a safe. I leaned in like a sister sharing a joke, like we were just two women trading a confidence before a trip, and asked her softly if she had donated this dress. The flinch was a tremor, not an earthquake, but I felt it in her hand where she still gripped me. Then the mask slid back into place. The practiced chuckle about minimalism and supporting good causes. Confirmed. She had sent this garment into the world expecting it to humiliate me on cue, never guessing it would carry the very mechanism our mother designed to keep her honest. The cruel comedy of it almost made me laugh, but I kept my smile small and neutral, because gracious restraint was my only useful theater now. Marie scanned my pass. The gate monitor flashed my upgraded seat. The name over the PA repeated a final boarding call for another flight, and in the counterpoint I felt my own name settle on me the way a good jacket does. Fitted, protective, chosen. Sabrina tried one more needle thread, murmuring that I didn't understand probate or brands or donors, that I was about to make a scene I couldn't walk back. I let her words pass through like cold air at a door. I told her quietly enough for only her to hear that I understood more than she thought, including the way she had turned Mom's last months into a networking opportunity. Her eyes flicked, quick as a sparrow. The ramp agent looked again. Ron's presence expanded just enough to be a shield. Inside the jet bridge, the air changed pitch, all carpeted hush and metal breath, that liminal tunnel where you move from public to contained and your choices acquire edges. I kept my shoulders square, smoothed the dress once more to steady my hands rather than the cloth, and stepped forward with the calm I had been practicing all evening, the calm that refuses to audition. Behind us, Sabrina's phone camera caught our backs because it couldn't catch my face. Ahead of us, the door to the aircraft stood open like an invitation that belonged to me, and to the instructions my mother had set in motion long before anyone thought to laugh at a thrift store hem. A silhouette separated from the wall at the jet bridge threshold, a ground supervisor with a lanyard full of keys and a posture that said he knew the difference between urgency and drama. He carried a slim black pouch in both hands the way Marie had carried the envelope, and when he reached me, he addressed me by name with the same gentle protocol that had guided every step since the host's phone landed in my palm. Sabrina stopped moving, all lacquer and calculation suspended mid-breath. Miss Hale, per notes, this is yours. Airports are full of routines. Tonight, one routine carries a secret my mother left. The ground supervisor placed the slim black pouch into my hands with the same reverence Marie had used for the envelope, and for a breath I felt every muscle in my shoulders want to fold under the weight of being seen. I smoothed the dress to steady my fingers, let my spine find its line, and lifted a calm smile that belonged to no one but me. Inside the pouch lay a prepaid phone, matte and anonymous, and a single folded note written in the neat, decisive hand I knew better than my own. Call when door closes. Mayfield 01111. AH. The initials were a small bell rung inside my chest. Ron scanned my upgraded pass, nodded to the flight attendants with the easy authority of someone whose kindness keeps the system together, and guided me across the threshold. Heads tilted as I stepped into the aisle, passengers doing that quick, involuntary calculation of story and status, wondering why a woman in a thrift dress had gravity. And for the first time all night, the dress felt like armor. Not embarrassment, a garment that had decided to carry me as much as I carried it. I tucked into 2A, slid the pouch beneath the window armrest, and drew a slow breath while the hum of air conditioning threaded its way through the cabin. Behind me, at the door, Sabrina's voice rose in strategic outrage. "I'm family," met with a firm, trained cadence from the agent. "Authorized party only," and the soft, inexorable sound of a boundary holding. The cabin door swung inward and sealed with that rubbery thud that always feels like the world choosing its shape. The hush reset, the flurry of last-minute bags went still, and the choreography of safety announcements began. I squared my shoulders, opened the pouch again, and thumbed the phone awake. The number from the note looked like a trap if you believed in traps, and like a bridge if you believed in maps. I dialed as the aircraft pushed a sigh through its ducts. A recorded voice, not my mother's, but something she had hired or borrowed, answered with a warmth engineered to convey competence. "Camden Row will honor Unit 22 access on arrival. Use code 718S. The S caught under my tongue. Sabrina, or 7:18 p.m. The time dinner began, the minute she lifted her wine and turned laughter into a weapon. The recording clicked off. Before I could assemble meaning, the phone pinged. A new document slid into the messages like a quiet verdict. Power of attorney, revocation. The e-signature date sat 1 week before Mom died, clean and final, witnessed by a notary whose seal I recognized from the will addendum. I opened the next attachment and felt the pressurized cabin tilt, even though the plane was still parked. A ledger. Lines and amounts and memo fields that kept using my name to authorize the draining of an aid account, all routed into an entity dressed up as legitimacy. Alden and Hart Client Services, parenthetical, Shell. I swallowed, not because I was surprised, but because confirmation has its own kind of grief. Another ping arrived before the ache could fully form, a text from an unknown number. Eliza, A&H Boutique Archive. She introduced herself in precise, spare sentences, the way professionals who handle expensive memories communicate. She wrote that Sabrina had approached the brand to authenticate documents and consult on donor relations, that the archive flagged irregularities in the domain and filings, and that my mother had authorized a liaison to contact me if travel protocols triggered. She said she was on the flight by design, not coincidence. She would stay quiet unless I invited help. She could verify the boutique's records and the shell company's theft of their name. The economy of it steadied me. I forwarded the documents to my email because redundancy is a kind of prayer I believe in. then copied them to cloud storage and to a folder labeled with a date and a word my mother loved: daylight. I let my hand rest on the curve of my knee, smoothing the skirt once more, not to hide nervousness, but to remind my body it belonged to me. In my mind, the dinner fork hovered again above the scallops, the old reflex to freeze and shrink, asking for stage time, and I declined it with kindness. The spiral of self-doubt had done its lap. Now the inner steel could take the floor. I imagined Sabrina at the door, bargaining with rules that would not bend for her, and I felt neither triumph nor pity, only clarity. She had tried to reroute me with ridicule. My mother had rerouted the reroute with a system that answers only to procedure. Across the aisle, a businessman adjusted his tie with the solemnity of a court appearance. A teenager scrolled a playlist titled Take Off. A flight attendant with the kindest eyes I'd seen all day crouched to ask if I needed water before we left the gate. I thanked her and said I was fine, and I meant it. The name over the PA a few minutes ago had given me a new posture, and I held it without strain. Outside the window, the tug nudged us back into the alley. The cabin lights shifted to a softer white, and the plane's low animal rumble settled into its chest. The prepaid phone vibrated once more with a final message, a short checklist in a style I recognized from my mother's lesson plans. Land. Go to Camden Row, code 718S. Do not confront, document. Invite witnesses you trust. It felt like standing at the mouth of a tunnel and discovering the darkness was simply shade. I breathed in, breathed out. I checked that the micro USB still lay flat in its seam and that the brass key's weight pressed faithfully in my clutch. I thought of the people who had made space for me tonight. Marie's quiet rigor, Ron's older school kindness, even the ground supervisor's careful hands. Routines, yes, but also people who choose to do their jobs with care, which is another way to say they choose to be part of the map. As the aircraft shuddered from the pushback tractor releasing its hold, the in-seat message light blinked above my armrest, a soft square of attention requesting me by name. The attendant leaned toward my row and spoke just loud enough to reach. Passenger in 6C requests to speak to Nora Hale privately. I turned in my seat with a steadiness I had earned since dinner and looked down the aisle. Eliza lifted a hand from 6C, a slim leather folio on her lap, her eyes clear and unafraid, the archivist my mother had placed in the path. A fashion archivist on my flight with my mother's initials pinned to her lapel isn't coincidence, it's choreography. Eliza's folio looked like it could hold centuries without bending, and when she rose from 6C, she did it with the unobtrusive grace of someone trained to guard stories that aren't hers. I smoothed the dress without thinking, a palm down the seam to steady my hands rather than the fabric, then angled toward her as the attendant gave a small nod that meant we had 3 minutes before final checks. Up close, I could see the enamel pin, A&H interlaced in the old script I knew from the attic shoebox, and beneath it her employee badge with a title I hadn't known existed, Boutique Archive, Client Registry. She thanked me for agreeing to speak and said that Alden and Hart had always maintained discrete registries for select clients, not for marketing but for provenance, custody, and occasionally instruments that behaved like trusts. My mother, she said, had a file under AH that wasn't just a label but a mechanism, and when she said mechanism, I felt the plane's quiet hum resolve into a metronome I could march to. She kept her voice low, the better to stay inside the cabin's privacy, and explained that weeks ago Sabrina had approached A&H, asking them to validate several documents for donor relations and a family hearing, presenting herself as executor and decision maker. The archive team flagged inconsistencies immediately, metadata that didn't match, a domain one letter off, a letterhead scanned from a trunk show invitation rather than generated by the registry, and they reached out through the emergency contact listed in my mother's protocol, which was not a lawyer, as I might have expected, but an airline liaison in customer care. That was how Murray and Ron and the ground supervisor knew what to do. My mother had threaded a path through institutions that still respect process. Eliza slid a thin envelope from her folio, the paper smooth as new leather, and inside it lay a single index card with 3 lines in an archivist's precise hand. Locker 22, Gate 22, Witness, read the ledger aloud. The simplicity of it made my throat ache. She added softly that Sabrina had spent the last month charming a clerk in family court angling for informal guidance and a sympathetic ear, and that while the paperwork on my side was strong, the narrative could turn sticky without daylight. Public proof mattered, which meant tonight was less about private satisfaction and more about how many sets of eyes could watch the math add up. I felt the fork pause from dinner replay in my wrist, that old instinct to freeze and minimize and apologize for needing oxygen, and I let it finish the movement so I could set it down for good. The midpoint revealed itself without fanfare. What I had thought was about a dress and the way my sister could turn cloth into humiliation had been about a reading all along, a reading that would sever her control by replacing gossip with receipts. Eliza confirmed what the seam had already suggested. The dress was a decoy container. Sabrina donated the estate lot in a rush to bury evidence and noise, and the charity did what charities do, separated and sold the pieces as fast as kindness allows. My buying this one was luck if you believed in luck, fate if you believed in choreography, and I found that I was willing to let the word choreography sit in my chest without embarrassment. We planned with the split attention you develop in hospitals and airports, the kind that holds 2 clocks at once. Upon landing, we would go straight to Camden Row, no detours and no arguments in parking lots. We would live stream the ledger reading with account numbers redacted and timestamps visible. We would tag the boutique's legal team so the letterhead authentication could move in tandem, and we would invite witnesses I trusted, my charge nurse if she was awake, the ground supervisor if he could spare 10 minutes, anyone whose job already asked them to be precise in public. Eliza spoke in clauses that refused melodrama, and the steadiness of her tone let the plan feel like a good coat, fitted, weatherproof, practical. She tucked the index card back into the envelope and, almost as an aside, said, "Your mom anticipated that Sabrina would target your humiliation reflex. She weaponized your shame proof. Tonight flips the script." The words landed without sting. I could feel the old identity, the quiet sister, the one who learns the stampede rules and keeps to the edges, dissolving into purpose that didn't need to be loud to be real. I squared my shoulders, not to look larger, but to inhabit what had been offered to me, and when Eliza smiled, it wasn't congratulation, it was recognition. Around us, the cabin shifted to the ritual of takeoff. Bins clicked, belts snapped. The attendant in navy demonstrated the brace position with a clarity that always moves me, and the captain's voice flowed over the speakers with that measured reassurance trained to make strangers agree to fly together. I caught my reflection in the darkened window and was surprised to see that the calm smile there belonged to me without effort. My name over the PA had not made me smaller, it had made me exact. I thanked Eliza for the envelope and the honesty, and told her I would rather not be brave alone, and she said that was precisely what registries are for, keeping memory from being a solitary sport. The seatbelt sign pinged on and then off with the captain's update about a bumpy patch on climb, a phrase that made turbulence sound like a personality quirk rather than a physics problem. I slipped the envelope into the pouch, checked that the brass key pressed its steady promise in my clutch, and smoothed the dress one last time, grateful for the ridiculous way cloth can become compass when a woman decides to survive her story in public. The captain announced light turbulence. The attendants took their jump seats, and a hand settled on my shoulder from the aisle. Sabrina, somehow now in first, smiling the expensive smile of someone who had just bought a last-minute upgrade to sit directly behind me. Some confrontations need a stage. Ours got cloud backdrops and a captive audience. Sabrina's hand tightened on my shoulder like she was claiming a seat that wasn't hers, voice pitched to sound helpful to anyone within eavesdropping range. "Let's not make a scene," she purred, angling her body so her bracelet flashed and the cabin could witness her composure. "Give me the pouch. I'll help you avoid charges." There it was, the word help wearing quotation marks, and underneath it the tell she couldn't suppress, charges. She knew about the ledger, knew it wasn't a rumor, but a record. I smoothed the dress to steady my hands, let my shoulders square the way muscle memory has taught them to do when the shift turns sideways, and turned enough to meet her without offering my face to the entire row. I kept my voice low and even, the tone I save for families in hallways when the truth will be a cliff and they need a railing. "Take your seat, Sabrina." A flight attendant hovered, professional and protective at once, one hand light on the galley wall, her eyes measuring whether she needed to intervene. Sabrina offered the woman a flinty smile that said she considered staff a variable to be managed. "We're fine," she announced, rehearsed and fluid, then leaned closer, breath expensive and sweet. "You don't understand probate. I do." She always overestimated her expertise, mistaking confidence for law. I let the shame flush rise and pass without heat. I had learned since the gate that letting it move through without engaging was its own kind of discipline. "Camden Row," I said, still quiet. "Meet me there on landing or walk away. No middle path." She smirked, the look of a gambler who thinks the dealer is her cousin. "You won't go live." The prepaid phone buzzed softly in my armrest. I glanced down at Eliza's message, a clipped memo snippet citing state statute and a one-line translation. "Recording in a public business is allowed with notice. You can do it." My spine lengthened as if someone had placed a gentle hand between my shoulder blades and reminded me I could stand taller without falling. I told Sabrina, still in that calm private register, that if she wanted to talk about what was lawful, we could let daylight do the heavy lift. Then I asked the question I'd been saving since the lounge, curious like a nurse taking a history instead of hostile like a sister settling scores. "Why the boutique, Sabrina?" The words were ordinary. The answer was not. She slipped, quick and quiet, and confessed what she had hoped would sound strategic. That the Alden and Hart cachet impresses donor boards, that doors open when you look like a person who belongs in certain rooms. She had been networking on a stolen ladder, the brand costume draped over her like a borrowed cape. The plane tipped into climb, and the cabin dipped. A soft chorus of ice rattled against plastic as if the drinks themselves were nervous. The metaphor wrote itself without my help. Instability puncturing performance, and I tucked the slim black pouch deeper into the dress lining, the ridiculous garment that kept saving me with its secret architecture. Sabrina's eyes tracked my hands, and I made no secret of what I was doing, because secrecy wasn't my currency anymore. Procedure was. She rolled her shoulders as if the belt chafed, then hissed the last weapon in her drawer. "If you read that ledger, I'll play the victim you always refuse to be." I let my face stay neutral. I had learned in rooms harsher than this that threats are only as strong as the posture they force you into, and I refused to bend. I glanced at the attendant, who met my eyes with that steady crew smile that says she has seen worse in rows 30 and 31 at 2 in the morning. "We're okay," I told her, and meant it. The calm felt earned, not borrowed. I turned back to Sabrina and made the smallest gesture toward the seatback screen, a reminder that other people had paid for quiet, and that she, for once, was not the center of the cabin. She straightened, considered another line of attack, then retreated one row with the practiced flounce of a woman who believes a camera will always find her again. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. The spiral of self-doubt had become a thread I could cut with 2 fingers. I slid the pouch's zipper closed and rested my palm on the seam, as if smoothing fabric when what I was really smoothing was the moment. Outside the window, the lights fell away and the clouds took over the view, a chalkboard smudged by a teacher's sleeve. I thought of my mother's voice folded into machines, of Marie and Ron and the ground supervisor who had chosen to carry my name like it mattered, and I realized this was the first time all night I felt the air in my lungs expand all the way to the back. I had been asked to perform stillness in 100 rooms. Tonight I was choosing it. Sabrina shifted behind me, trying out sighs like costumes, then settled on silence when it didn't win her applause. I looked down at Eliza's follow-up, a checklist bulleting what we'd do within the hour. Arrive, notify, document, read. Redact numbers, tag legal, invite witnesses. The list felt like a life raft and a syllabus, both. I texted back one word, ready, and slid the phone into the pouch. The hum under my feet deepened, the cabin light softened to a flattering dusk, and the overhead bin sat obedient as closed mouths. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The attendant from the galley stepped forward with a handwritten note on a folded napkin, the kind of small analog kindness that survives even when everything goes digital. She placed it on my tray with care. Upon landing, customer care will escort you first to ground transport. Per AH. I didn't turn to look at Sabrina. I didn't need to. I felt the way her jaw tightened in the air behind me the same way you can feel weather shift before rain. I lifted my eyes to the aisle, thanked the attendant with that calm smile I'd been practicing since dinner, and let the note sit like a promise between my hands. Storage units feel like mausoleums until you turn a key and resurrect the truth. Touchdown jarred the plane back into gravity and purpose, and by the time the door opened, customer care had become a small procession. Marie's counterpart met us at arrivals with a clipboard and a competence that felt like shelter, and we moved through the carpeted corridors to the rideshare curb, where a shuttle idled with the patience of people who do their jobs without needing applause. Eliza slid in beside me with her folio. Sabrina followed at a performative distance, already rehearsing the indignation she'd wear if we filmed. I smoothed the dress to settle my hands, squared my shoulders to fix my breath, and thanked the driver by name because saying names out loud makes the world less hostile. Camden Row's office smelled like coal dust and lemon cleaner. The manager, a compact man with a barcode scanner clipped to his belt, verified my ID and then the blue ribbon key, his gaze catching on the tag number with a brief nod that told me the protocol had crossed his desk before. We walked to Unit 22, the metal door corrugated like an industrial eyelid, and when the key slid in and turned, the lock gave with a click that sounded like a relieved exhale. For a heartbeat, I stood still, hand on the pull, remembering Mom's claim that the hardest part of truth isn't telling it, but opening the door to the room where it lives. Then I raised the panel. An air that had been waiting for months came out to meet us. Inside, the fluorescent flicker revealed taped banker boxes labeled in Mom's measured print, a garment bag hung from a rolling rack, and a slim fireproof case on a low shelf like a sleeping animal. On top of the case lay a single note in handwriting my bones knew. Read aloud if she stands with you. I didn't look back at Sabrina yet. I set my phone on a mini tripod and framed the shot so that the boxes and my face shared the same truth, then went live with a disclaiming calm that made the space feel safer. I'm Nora, I said, voice even. This is a reading for transparency. We will redact account numbers, we will answer questions we can, and document the rest. I opened the ledger, a hardbound book with columns ruled in blue, and began. Dates, amounts, transfer origins that carried my name in memo fields I never wrote, destinations with names engineered to sound legitimate and invisible, the kind of shells that bounce light instead of reflecting it. I read slowly, clinical instead of cruel, because cruelty wastes time and I wanted the audience to follow the math. Eliza stood just off frame, ready with the boutique archive stamp when it mattered. Sabrina lasted 3 pages before interrupting, accusing me of defamation, insisting that context would vindicate her and that I was weaponizing grief. Eliza, still in that archivist cadence that values accuracy over volume, cited the brand's registry records, the cease and desist draft against Alden and Hart client services, and the metadata that placed Sabrina's favorite documents at a kitchen scanner instead of a law office. The comments began as a trickle and swelled into a current. Nurses chimed in about care funds and the quiet ways families cut corners. Legal minds offered statute numbers and reminders about chain of custody. Strangers typed simple encouragement and stern questions in equal measure. The sunlight of witnesses warmed the cold storage air. I kept my posture steady, my voice precise, and my gaze open, as if I were explaining discharge instructions to a family that wanted their person safe more than they wanted to be right. When the first ledger finished, I lifted the fireproof case onto the shelf. The combination turned as if my hands had always known the numbers, and when the seal released, a paper smell, ink, glue, time, rose like breath from a choir. Inside was a notarized addendum to Mom's will, the embossed seal stamping light into circles. The text was brief and irrevocable, a scholarship fund for nurses at the community hospital in lieu of discretionary cash disbursements. Executor may not waive or reallocate. Compliance to be verified annually by the archive contact listed under AH. Grief hit me hard and clean. Admiration braided to loss. She had taken the softest part of me, my work when no one is filming, and built a backbone out of it. I read the addendum aloud, then held it still while Eliza stepped into frame to authenticate the letterhead and the notary ID against the archive's registry. My audience stabilized into something that felt like a room. Questions appeared, respectful and pointed. How long had the transfers been happening? Did the boutique plan legal action against the shell? Would the scholarship prioritize aides turning into nurses? I answered what I could and promised the rest would be addressed with counsel. Behind the camera, Sabrina shifted from indignation to a saccharine plea for offline sister talks, then back to threats, then back to promises. None of it had traction because daylight is friction-proof once you commit to it. I took one more breath and thanked everyone for their attention, for the simple labor of watching a woman read numbers while wearing a dress that had carried a map most of the night. I turned to place the addendum back in the case and to lift the garment bag down, intending to catalog everything before we sealed the unit and felt the room tighten. Sabrina, who had sidled closer with the pretense of helping, lunged for the tripod with a hand quick as a habit. I reached out, more to protect the record than the device, and her elbow knocked the garment bag off the rack. The zipper burst, silk spilled like light across concrete, and nestled in the folds lay a vintage Alden and Hart dress with a stitched label just visible under the lamp's hum. For the one who didn't laugh. The stream caught the words. The comments exploded. Sabrina froze with her hand mid-grab as the label finished saying what the ledger had begun. Humiliation loses power when it meets evidence on camera. The garment bag spill had frozen Sabrina in a posture that only looks elegant in photographs, her hand mid-grab and her mouth open just enough to betray the calculation behind the outrage, and I felt the old fork paws in my wrist try to return before I set it down for good, smoothed the dress to remind my body whose it was, and lifted my eyes to the lens with the calm smile I had rehearsed since dinner. She recovered quickly, announcing to the stream that the ledger was context-free, that numbers without narrative were slander in columns, and that anyone with sense would wait for a professional to interpret them. I opened the folder marked Context, clicked the first memo, and read her own language aloud with the slow exactness of discharge instructions. Emails where she directed funds to brand partnerships, using the boutique's name as a passkey, where she justified temporary reallocations to cultivate donors, where she promised to clean the paper trail once the scholarship launch had earned her a panel seat. Eliza stepped into frame as my hand steadied the page, placed her phone on speaker, and introduced A&H and counsel with an archive number formality that made the room feel like a record rather than a scene. The attorney confirmed on the call and for the viewers that the brand had filed a cease and desist against Sabrina's misrepresentation, that the shell entity borrowing their name would be pursued, and that the registry was prepared to provide affidavits as needed. The Camden Row manager, uneasy but firm, cleared his throat and said, for the recording and for us, that the police liaison was en route to take statements, that this had crossed the narrow threshold from family quarrel to reportable conduct, and that he would lock the unit temporarily once we finished our reading to preserve chain of custody. I turned slightly to include more than my own face, to make space for the audience as if they were a semicircle of chairs at the end of a long hallway, and I told them what I could tell without cruelty, that this was not vengeance. It was the setting of a boundary with documents, that I would file to enforce the addendum and recover what had been siphoned for a scholarship that would carry my mother's name and work forward, that the impulse to hide money behind nicer nouns is not new, but it is still theft. Sabrina's eyes glossed with practiced tears, the version of herself she knows will play if a room is unprepared, and I might have pitied the reflex if I hadn't saved the background audio from the plane. When she stepped toward the phone to plead, the stream captured her earlier hiss in my row, the line about playing the victim I refused to be, and the comments filled with a quiet collective exhale that sounded like recognition. My screen lit with a text from Aunt Lorna, a family friend who has always loved Sabrina's brightness and my usefulness, begging me to stop the broadcast and handle this like ladies. Attaching an old photo of Sabrina at an Alden and Hart trunk show in a borrowed shift with a caption about legacy. The metadata betrayed them both, the date stamp matching the first wave of transfers I had just read aloud, the brand veneer doing what it always does when you hold it to light. It reflected a truer shape. I invited Sabrina, gently and on camera, to step off frame and talk with me while Eliza continued reading the totals, because I wanted to offer dignity even when it hadn't been returned. She refused, pivoted to taunting the viewers about armchair juries, and the miscalculation was almost tender in its predictability, because the audience had already seen enough to prefer math over performance. I placed my mother's note beside the dress label on the steel shelf where the light struck both without glare, letting the words, read aloud if she stands with you, share space with the stitched line, for the one who didn't laugh, and the sight steadied me more than any breath exercise I've ever used on a night. Shift. I told the viewers that love leaves maps, that mine had been sewn into a hem that a sister mocked and a mother weaponized into proof, and then I turned the camera slightly toward Eliza as she authenticated letterhead and notary seals for the audience who cared about process as much as outcome. The manager's radio crackled twice. The hallway footsteps drew nearer and stopped outside the unit like a period landing at the end of a long sentence. Justice, when it begins, is not a cymbal crash, but a series of clicks that add up. So I sat on the rolled stool, shoulders squared, and sent 3 emails in order while narrating for accountability. First, to the probate clerk, attaching the power of attorney revocation and the addendum. Second, to the court's filing portal with Eliza's drafted injunction requesting immediate preservation of assets and a temporary restraining order against further disbursements. Third, to the Archive Council with a link to the stream and timestamps for the memos I had read. I kept my tone level, asked the audience to log off and rest if they needed to, promised a summary and redactions by morning, and thanked them for witnessing a woman read her way out of a humiliation that had never belonged to her. The unit felt warmer, not because the heater had kicked on, but because sunlight of the digital kind had moved in and refused to leave. Sabrina's mask had slipped so many times it no longer fit, and the dress on the concrete looked less like a relic than an answer. My phone buzzed in my palm, a number I knew but had not seen light up since February, and I let myself hope because hope too can be procedural when you're careful with it. I pressed play on the new voicemail, and my mother's voice, warm, composed, unmistakable, filled the unit and the small, waiting silence after the stream ended. If Sabrina ever laughs at your dress, remember what's sewn inside. The timestamp glowed the week she died. The gate agent spoke only my name. Now I speak my own life into order. The unit had the stale chill of a place that keeps secrets well, but it warmed as the police liaison arrived with a clipboard, and the practiced patience of someone who knows silence can be both shelter and strategy. I smoothed the dress, more for ritual than nerves, squared my shoulders, and gave my statement in the same steady cadence I used to explain discharge instructions at 3 a.m. I filed the injunction from my phone while he watched, every attachment double-checked, every file name precise, revocation.pdf, addendum.pdf, ledger excerpts, redacted.pdf. Sabrina stood near the door, bravado thinning like steam, her arms crossed too tightly, a bracelet biting into her wrist where she'd clenched it all night. When the officer finished the preliminaries, I played the voicemail. My mother's voice, measured, warm, unsentimental, filled the concrete room, and respectable silence settled over all of us. Eliza stepped forward with the boutique's archivist log, a time-stamped entry corroborating both the recording and the protocol that moved it. The liaison noted chain of custody and photographed the screen with the same respect he'd give a crime scene label. I felt the shame flush I'd been fighting since dinner glance off me without landing. Evidence has a temperature. When it's this clean, it cools the room. The storage manager, still uneasy but clearly invested in getting the truth right, offered us the small conference room beside his office. We filed in, the officer, the manager, Eliza, me, and I signed the intake packet for the scholarship fund paperwork Eliza had prepared, initiating the transfer to the trust once funds are recovered and verified. The document language was unadorned and exacting. It didn't need to be pretty to be good. I read each clause aloud for the camera and for myself, then signed with a hand that didn't shake. The dress that had been, hours ago, a punchline at a white tablecloth, lay folded on a chair like a standard. I pressed the blue ribbon key into my palm until the metal's indentation cooled me down from the after-surge of getting things right. Sabrina tried last, a plea for a family arrangement, her voice reaching for a softness she hadn't earned. I kept my expression neutral and my tone kind because gracious restraint is power you don't have to announce. The arrangement, I said, is a lawful one, transparent and recorded. It wasn't a victory lap, it was an exit sign. Eliza organized copies with the competence of someone who has trained dozens of hands to touch fragile things without breaking them. The officer gathered our statements, thanked the manager for preserving the space, and explained what would happen next. The report number, the detective assignment, the hold on the unit until the judge's order. He didn't talk to me like I was hysterical. He talked to me like I was responsible. Odd how rare that still feels. I packed our proofs without dramatics. The ledger, the notarized addendum, the garment bag with the vintage Alden and Hart dress, label for the one who didn't laugh, the slim black pouch with the prepaid phone and note, the USB tucked back into its seam. Each item had a place in the rolling case like a tool in a tray. The little blue ribbon key clicked onto my ring, its weight exactly right. I caught myself smoothing the skirt again and let the gesture settle into something small and private. Not a tick, but a thanks. We walked back through the corridor where the metal doors sleep in rows. Sabrina followed, quieter now, absorbing the edge of a world that no longer turned to catch her. At the exit, she paused and asked if we could talk as sisters in the lot. I thought of my mother's letter, of the ledger, of the scholarship that would carry 100 names I'll never meet, and I understood the generosity my mother had built into this night. I offered Sabrina the only dignity left. When you're ready to email your statement and the passwords to the accounts you open, copy counsel, I said. We'll read it, we'll respond, we won't negotiate the truth. I thanked the storage manager by name, shook the liaison's hand, and hugged Eliza, who receives gratitude like a professional, without deflecting it, without hoarding it. In the car, with the case secure in the back and the phone on airplane mode out of habit, I drove toward the airport under a sky that looked scrubbed clean. The decision to go back felt simple in a way I hadn't trusted decisions to feel lately. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing the next right thing, then the next. Arrival smelled like jet fuel and relief. I parked, smoothed the dress, and rolled the case toward departures with the calm smile I had earned by not sprinting to the end of any sentence before it finished speaking. Gate 22 sat like a full circle. Marie was on shift, hair pulled back, badge shining under fluorescent honesty. When she saw me, she lifted a small salute with 2 fingers and something like pride, and I felt the dinner fork that had hovered over scallops hours ago finally make contact with the plate, a sound so soft it was mostly a memory. I waited until they called families and those who need more time, and then I boarded, not because I required extra assistance, but because I liked the idea of moving with the people who understand that life doesn't always match the timetable, that some of us carry more than a roller bag down a narrow aisle. At my seat, I eased the garment bag into the overhead and rested the rolling case wheels down beside my knee. The cabin dimmed to that artificial dusk that flatters even the sleepless. I slid my fingers along the inner seam of the vintage dress one last time, tender as you touch a scar that healed well, expecting only thread and the quiet brag of good tailoring. There, hidden, unpulled, ran a second stitch, small and deliberate, another message sleeping in the hem. One last secret waiting. Will I pull the thread? Would you pull that second, untouched stitch, or let it sleep, and why? If you were in my place at gate 22, would you have gone live or handled it quietly off camera? Drop your best one-line advice for anyone facing polite bullying and public humiliation, and tell me which moment flipped the power for you. Subscribe and turn on notifications. When this video hits our next milestone, I'll reveal exactly what that last stitch hides. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that documentation beats drama.